Welcome back. My first guest today, as always, leading off. And what a better leadoff hitter than Luke Jones himself. Luke, welcome in.
Dennis, how are you? You're too kind. Happy conference championship weekend.
Is that what it is, Luke? Because I don't know. Around here, it seemed like the Lamar Jackson is a story that's not going to go away anytime soon. I know that in our pre-production meeting, you talked about maybe Lamar fatigue, right? Let's get this. You said let's get this thing over with, one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even maybe, it's absolutely fatigue at this point. And look, I love my job. Don't get me wrong. I'm blessed. I'm very fortunate to be in the position that I'm in to be able to cover the hometown team and everything that goes with that. But boy, it just at
I
some
know.
point, can we
Luke,
have a
Luke, Luke,
resolution?
it was
I mean,
old a year. It was old a year ago, right? It was old in the preseason. It's been an old stagnant story.
uh,
Right? Everybody's
yeah,
exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, and that's why I keep coming back to. I've talked about it with Nestor. I've talked about it with you since the season came to an end, even before the season came to an end, where I just keep asking the question, what has changed that wasn't the case over the last 2 years, right?
Nothing.
I mean, it's
Nothing.
just,
You know
yeah,
what I thought the most telling thing was from the press conference, right, with DaCosta and Harbaugh was when DaCosta said it takes two to tango. That was my biggest takeaway. You're nodding your head, yes. For our listeners, the Ravens may have the appetite to sideline Lamar Jackson, and the question is, does Lamar Jackson have the appetite to sign with the Ravens? Not that saying it in a negative vein. It's just if his appetite is a guaranteed deal and the Ravens don't want to pay him that, then it's done. They'll tag him, they'll trade him. It may be just as simple as that.
yeah. I mean, and to be fair to Lamar and look at it from his perspective, I mean, the Ravens want to sign him at their price, and Lamar Jackson very well may want to sign with the Ravens, but he wants to sign at his price.
Right.
So
Correct. 100%.
something has to something has to
100%.
give, So that's where, as I've tried to spitball, and I've brought up to you to throw the non-exclusive tag at them to force action if you actually want to
Yeah.
sign them. If you're just looking to, privately, and obviously the Ravens were going to say all the great things,
Of
all the
course.
positive things. I mean, really, the season-ending press conference, I was amused by so much of the reaction that, as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, if you felt markedly different or better about the situation, congrats to Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh for doing their job. I mean, that's what they were always going to
Luke,
do.
they're selling a car. It's a used
Right,
car. It's 5 years old, right?
right.
They got to put some new wheels and tires on it in the off season, right? So we want this car. It's a beautiful car. It's shiny, right? It's going to be rebuilt, right? It's going to be Maryland State inspected, and it's going to be brand spanking new in cherry condition, and it's worth X amount to us. Period. They have to boost his. It's a bit the business thing to do for them is to boost his market value.
No question, no question. That's why there was so little that I really took away from
Correct.
from that season-ending press conference. And as I noted, talking about this with Nestor, I noted it in what I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com. The many little takeaways. I did think it was a good sign that DeCosta had mentioned that he had talked with Lamar even earlier in the day. John Harbaugh had talked with Lamar about the decision to ultimately move on from Greg Roman. And while I'm not nearly as moved about this notion that Lamar is going to be involved in the process, I don't think that means he's going to be sitting there interviewing the candidates. I
You
do
mean
think
he's not going to draft like a 10 and DOS from Indiana like Joe Flacco did in the fourth round
no,
back
no,
in the
I don't
day?
think
That's
well,
not going to happen.
and if we're going to use that example, maybe you shouldn't be looking for impact from your quarterback because that didn't exactly work out too well. But the overall point I was trying to make, that if you're looking for a small reason, a smidgen, a very minute reason
Oh,
for optimism, it was that Lamar didn't leave the building, leave the state on Monday and turn his phone off, right? I mean, the fact that they were still having some communication, even whether it was about the contract or not, that they had some football related conversation even a few days after the season, that to me was a good sign. Do I think that means a deal's imminent? No. Do I think that means anything dramatically changes? No. But it does speak to it hasn't gotten to an impasse level where they're not speaking to each other.
and
Does
even
that
and
mean that?
even and even if that was the case, Luke, this is 2023. We saw Kyler Murray in 2022.
Yeah.
He took down his Twitter account. He blocked the Cardinals. Oh my God, he's leaving, and then he gets a
Yeah.
contract, and now perhaps the Cardinals are second guessing the contract, right? So cautionary tales on both sides of the tape.
No question. I mean, you just said it. Kyler Murray's the last man standing from everyone that was involved in that situation, other than ownership, I
Sure.
suppose. But I mean, it just speaks to, and look, we were talking about months and months ago, we were talking about the fact that how nasty that situation had gotten, and yet how, I don't want to say harmonious, because I think the Ravens and Lamar have both had frustration about this. They haven't aired their dirty laundry, right? They've been able to keep that side of it in-house. They haven't leaked out negative, publicity, negative type stories about it. Although certainly the injury and the handling of that we can debate. But as far as the contractual part of this, that's why so many fans had said for the longest time, there's nothing to see here. They both want to continue the relationship, but after 2+ years, you say, well, okay, well, why isn't there a deal then? So that's where, yeah, of course, there's skepticism. But I mean, to go back to our original point, we can keep having the same conversation over and over,
Over and
and we'll
over.
continue, to some degree,
Of
because it's that
course.
important of a
Of
story.
course it is.
However, there is very much a sense in my mind, and I feel like this is a growing sentiment among fans at this point in time, and probably, the organization and probably Lamar to some degree or another, that you really feel like you need a resolution one way or the other here. Either you got to work out a long-term deal, and then great, he's your quarterback long-term, and you can get back to the matter at hand, which is supposed to be competing for Super Bowls and doing everything you can to maximize the roster in order to do that. Or you both sides come to the decision that there is not a deal to be made here that's going to satisfy both parties, and out of respect to one another, it's time to explore other avenues, which would be a trade. Now, again, that doesn't mean that happens overnight. Doesn't mean that the Ravens should take the first deal or Lamar should take the first contract offer that the acquiring team would offer him. So there's still complications involved with that. But
Well,
for me, what isn't tenable in my mind from a football standpoint, maybe it is from a business standpoint, and maybe they could make it work, and they could say kumbaya enough to play in 2023. But the idea of him playing on the tag, especially if you're talking the exclusive tag, which is going to be upwards of 43, 44, 40, and we don't know, but it's going to be up in the 40 million plus, and the ramifications that has on the rest of your roster, and then not knowing what that means in terms of Lamar's offseason commitment level, because hey, he wouldn't be under contract. He's under no obligation until he signs that tag to be there for anything. Is that really going to be what maximizes your chances of winning a Super Bowl? It's why I've also laughed at, not laughed at, but scoffed at the notion of the Ravens tagging Lamar with intentions of keeping him in 2023, while also drafting a quarterback in the first round, such as Richardson from Florida, where I'm just saying, okay, well, that just sounds like you're punting on 2023, because you have all these roster needs. You're not going to have any cap space if you tag
that
Lamar,
makes
and then
zero
you're using your
sense.
first round pick on his replacement. You might as well just trade him then, because you're wasting another season of Lamar
Doesn't
Jackson
make
if
any
you do that.
sense. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
So,
don't see them doing that. Let me ask you a
I
question,
mean,
Rick. So let's assume he gets tagged. Let's assume he gets traded. I would think that the team that gives up a king's ransom for him, whether it's the Panthers or the Falcons, I would think that they would have a deal with him in principle, because they're not going to trade for the player unless the player is willing to ink himself to a 5-year contract.
Exactly. I mean, I think that would have to be the case. The only way that wouldn't be a case to me would be that the compensation would be substantially less at that point in time, because it would come with no assurance that Lamar Jackson's going to be your quarterback beyond 2023. So,
No one's going to give up in a J.C. Horn, uh, 2 first, perhaps 3, 2 seconds, etc. If they can't get him under contract.
right. And that's where we come back to the complication once again of Lamar not having an agent. And that's why, even as you and I
This
were
is true.
spitballing
This is true.
even as you and I were spitballing the idea of the non-exclusive tag, and I've struggled with that. Again, that wasn't me saying that I would definitely do that. It was, how do you spark action? How do you create some traction here for a
Yeah.
deal?
Oh,
But
well,
even with that scenario, that still involves Lamar needing to then shop himself and go on visits and all the things that go on with that. Not to say there won't be teams beating down his door wanting to sign him, or teams that would be interested. But again, how do you navigate that? And look, maybe he has a plan in place to handle that. And maybe if he gets the tag, maybe at that point maybe he hires an agent at that point. I don't know. Maybe that's a different a moment in time for him as it pertains to his long-term future. But based on what we've seen so far, based on what we've heard from the Ravens, and obviously that's the Ravens' perspective of it, it doesn't mean that that's 100% truth. It's where you continue to have some skepticism as far as how smoothly this process can go. So it's just it's you continue to come back to the same question over and over, which is what I'm asking, and that's hanging over this offensive coordinator search is what's different now with this situation that we weren't talking about 2 years ago or a year ago. Again, nothing about the 2022 season suggests that the Ravens are going to be more willing to give him more guaranteed money when he didn't finish a second straight season because of injury. I mean, that alone, even if you put aside any other parts as far as the negotiating history, but if you're Lamar Jackson and you see what this offense looked like without him, and everything involved there, are you moving from where you are, considering you're that much closer to at least being scheduled to become a free agent? We know he's not actually hitting the open market, but he's closer on his timeline from being under a rookie contract with the Ravens to having a say in where he goes, whether it's tag, seeking a trade, or even talking a year or two from now if they do this, go down the line with the tag, that at some point in time he has way more leverage to go to another team and get the deal he wants. Why are you going to give in either? So again, unless there's a change of heart on one side or the other, it's tough to look at this thing and feel optimistic that a deal is going to get done.
Well, here's the other burning question that I have, Luke, that a lot of people haven't talked about. If Lamar Jackson isn't the quarterback for the Baltimore Ravens in 2023, then who is? I mean, do they bring in Taylor Heineke to keep the seat warm while your top 10 rookie quarterback, whether it's Stroud or Levis or whomever, comes to Baltimore? Do they give Derek Carr $90 million for 3 years? Do they bring in Baker Mayfield? I mean, if you don't have a quarterback in this league in a division, now you got Joe Burrow, who looks like he's the real deal. Bad enough the Ravens had a deal with Ben Roethlisberger for what, 15, 17 years.
Yeah.
Now you got another monster quarterback in your division. You have Deshaun Watson, who's a capable quarterback with the full offseason with the Browns. The Steelers, Kenny Pickett seems to be okay. We'll find out in year two. But even in the division, how they're going to compete without a quarterback, and I know they might be of the mindset, look, they took the Bengals into deep water, but the Bengals made the play. Let's just put it out there. And I do think the Bengals' game plan was different against the Ravens than it was against the Bills. So people to say, well, if and then, I think that's really diminishing what the Bengals did up in Buffalo, which was completely demolish the Bills.
I think I agree with you on that. And look, I mean, the Ravens defense deserved its props, no
100%.
question about it. But as I wrote in my latest 12 Ravens thoughts, that we also know that this is a defense that wilted with late game leads, even as recently as week 17 against Pittsburgh. So let's not act like if Tyler Huntley scores a touchdown there, let's not act like the Ravens they've got it sewn up that they're going to win. Now, they would have been favored over the last 10 minutes with a 7-point lead, but you don't know. But you're right. And this is why, for me, you really run a danger of, that word close, right? It's easy to say the Ravens are close. Pittsburgh's probably saying the same thing right now when you kind of look at how they finished the season. However, and as I noted this past week, the Cincinnati Bengals have 5 playoff wins now over the last 2 seasons, and that's going into the AFC Championship on Sunday against Kansas City, where, they're on the road. They've beaten the Chiefs, 3 times in a row. So certainly they've got a great shot, even if I might go with Kansas City as far as if I were picking this game. But it's a coin flip kind of situation. It really feels that way for me. But over the last 10 years, Dennis, guess how many playoff wins the Ravens and the Steelers have combined for? 5. The same as the Cincinnati Bengals over the last 13 months.
Not many.
So it really, and look, that's not to say that the Ravens should blow it up and fire John Harbaugh. That's not to say the Steelers should blow it up and fire Mike Tomlin. But I think for both organizations who have kind of, it sounds funny saying this because the Ravens aren't that old of an organization, but they've been the old guard with the Steelers as it relates to the AFC North at the very least. So we're talking the last 20 plus years. But the new kid in town is really kind of lapping them a little bit, at least in terms of January success these last couple years. So that's where I think that word close, and you just said it, and that is what is so unsettling about this. It's really easy this time of year, and I say this all the time talking about the offseason. It's really easy to brainstorm ideas or talk about how you want to give young guys playing time and all these different things. It's easy to say that in January when you're out of the playoffs, obviously, talking offseason, February, March, April, May, June. But once you get into training camp and you start to see what you have, and then especially once you get into the season, some of those ideas that sound great in a vacuum when you're just sitting in your draft room, or you're sitting in upstairs with the front office trying to figure out what you want to do. It's where it's so unsettling with this idea that, if you are going to trade Lamar Jackson, and look, that's not to say that wouldn't be what the Ravens ultimately have to do if you ultimately won't move off of your stance and he won't move off of his. But we know, hey, they've done very well for themselves the last two times they've tried to draft, a franchise quarterback, Lamar Jackson and Joe Flacco before that. The odds tell you,
Yep,
they're probably due for another Kyle Bowler sooner than later, as it pertains
I
to
would
that.
agree with you. And what
So
would kill
that's
me?
where, and that doesn't mean you just give Lamar, you automatically give him whatever he wants, but it is, boy, that's a cautionary tale, because you start talking about, a bridge quarterback. Okay, well, fine, but what if that guy you draft isn't the right guy? I mean, if you draft Kyle Bowler on the heels of trading Lamar Jackson, whew, one, that's going to be tough from a competitive standpoint, but boy, the backlash as far as your fan base and everything too, that's
To your
ugly.
point, Zach Wilson, I've watched him for 2 years now. He reminds me of Kyle Bowler. To me, he's Kyle Bowler 2.0. Big arm, right? Um, but that's about it. The game seems too fast for him. Doesn't seem to be much of a leader. And again, there's nothing personal against either player, but that's the danger, right? You draft a guy. I don't know, was Wilson the second or third quarterback taken, a player taken in the draft? But the Jets need a quarterback, right? They're
Yeah.
back in the market for a quarterback. The problem that I have with letting Lamar Jackson go is that, let's say he goes to the Falcons, and I'm looking at the roster right now. You got Drake London, you got Kyle Pitts, you get another wide receiver, and all of a sudden you got Tyler Algier in the backfield. We saw that they can be a good offense with a great quarterback. Um, he goes to Carolina. He's got DJ Moore. I would love to see Lamar Jackson with a modern offense, a
Yeah.
pro style offense with some wide receiver ones and wide receiver twos. In 2019, I saw this online the other day when he was the MVP. His receivers were Hollywood Brown and Miles Boykin at rookies. You had who was it?
Seth
Something.
Roberts and Willie
Seth Roberts,
Snead.
Willie
Yeah.
Snead, and he was the league MVP
Yeah.
with those wide receivers. So the question that begs to be asked by anyone is, what does he look like in a real offense? Does the guy blow up? I mean, I saw T. Higgins. He said, "Yeah, I don't. You throw the ball my direction. It's not 50-50. It's 80-20. We don't
Yeah.
have a guy like that, right? Mark Andrews is probably the best example of one, but he just like Joe Flacco after he signed a big contract, he hasn't been supported by big time weapons.
Well, and that to me, Dennis, is what was so frustrating about this past season. I mean, there was at least conjecture and discussion and opinions of fans and or media about Greg Roman's job at this time last year. They decided to bring him back, and hey, look, in the same way that I defended Wink Martindale, I'll defend Greg Roman in 2021 when you looked at all the injuries that both sides of the ball endured. I mean, it was tough to really get a read,
Of course,
but you run it back with the same offensive coordinator, but then you traded Hollywood Brown and you didn't replace him. And I'll continue to
100%.
say that was an unforgivable, that was Eric DeCosta messed up there. I mean, not on the deal itself. I'll continue to say the value of the trade itself was good.
100%.
They won immediately from a value standpoint,
And
but you don't go out and play.
right? And
Right.
DeCosta knows this. He's not stupid.
Sure.
From his past dealings, it looks like he learned from his mistakes, right? And he won't
Yeah.
repeat that mistake again.
You certainly hope not, but
Can't.
at the same time, I mean, we've talked about wide receiver how many years? I mean, it's an organizational thing. It goes beyond Eric. That's an organizational thing. When you're
Which is
talking about,
why they have to get a veteran, a proven
yeah,
guy. They can't. They
yeah,
just give it up, right? Just give up a first and a third and get the guy.
right. So, but everything about 2022 for me, I wanted that to be the year where you do open things up a little bit. And that's why I felt good about where they were at wide receiver a year ago at this time with Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman. And, I mean, the other young guys, I mean, that everyone was trying to hype up. It's like, okay, but they were,
Oh,
Duvernay was a day 2 pick, fine, if he's your number 3. But, you're talking about day 3 picks. I mean, if they hit, great, but you don't just hand them playing time. And that's why I just had a problem with how the Ravens proceeded. But you didn't find out any of that this past
no.
season. And that's why this past season felt like such a waste in that regard, at the very least, because you and I have also talked about the idea of before you commit however much money Lamar Jackson ultimately gets, you would have liked to have seen what he looks like with
Oh,
a little more of a pass. I don't want to say pass heavy because I think it's always going to make sense for him to have more of a run centric offense, but more balance, more explosiveness from your passing game. Certainly a greater emphasis on the wide receivers rather than we saw less and less emphasis on it out of necessity this year. So,
and look, we've seen Hall
you
of Fame
didn't find
quarterbacks.
any of that out.
We've seen Hall of Fame quarterbacks complain about lack of receivers. Tom Brady up in New England telling Bill Belichick, I'm taking less money every year so you can build a roster.
Yeah.
Give me some weapons. Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, right? You draft a quarterback when I'm still in my prime. What are you doing, front office? What's he going to do sitting on the bench for a couple of years? So rightfully, and Lamar hasn't complained publicly, to his credit,
Right.
about having lack of explosive players at his disposal, which
Yeah.
diminishes his talent. It really does.
Yeah. And look, this has never been me saying that the Ravens have to have one of the 3 best wide receivers in football. This is not me saying that the Ravens need to have one of the 5 best wide receiver groups in the NFL. Just don't be near the bottom the way that they
Oh,
constantly have been. And look, to be clear, and this is where I will stick up for Eric DaCosta a little more than I did a few minutes ago, because philosophically, they did invest a nice amount of draft capital over the last 3-4 years at wide receiver. However, again, this is just like talking about theoretical value in a trade. Like, they traded Marquise Brown. Look, they got a first round pick. Tyler Linderbaum looks like he's on his way to being a Pro Bowl caliber center. I'm not bashing the trade by itself. The trade in a vacuum from a value standpoint, they won instantly when you consider how much contractual control was left for Marquise
100%.
Brown. However, you don't go out there with your hypothetical value and future draft picks trying to win a super or trying to win a game on Sunday or trying to win a Super Bowl. That's you use those things, but you still have to have players at the end of the day. And they didn't have enough players at wide receiver, and that's what was frustrating to me. But this is where it's just frustrating because, to your point, let's say you trade Lamar Jackson and he goes somewhere where there is a greater emphasis on the passing game
Sure.
and wide receiver, and he looks like Lamar, MVP version 2. Boy, I
Louisville,
don't want to be too
Louisville,
I
Louisville,
don't want to be
Lamar. I'll
right.
go
I don't
back.
want to be too dramatic here.
Seriously.
But it's boy, you're looking like the Red Sox after you traded Babe Ruth
Oh
to,
my
to the
God.
Yankees, and he's hitting 50 plus home runs every year. So
Look, look,
that's
look at Eli Manning, right? He's not the most accurate quarterback, but he gets to 2 Super Bowls, got a great defensive line on a defense, but he had wide receivers with dynamic, terrific catch
yeah.
radius. He just put it in the vicinity and he came down with the ball.
Well,
And that
look at
made him
Joe.
a two-time, and if he doesn't get in the Hall of Fame, he'll be only the second quarterback besides Jim Plunkett with 2 rings, not in the Hall of Fame. But the point is, he had receivers with catch radius. Peyton
Well,
Manning had receivers with catch radius. Patrick Mahomes, you go right down the line, and those teams, whether it was the Chiefs or the Colts under Manning, they would get big leads, and then their defenses weren't great, but they had great defensive ends. They would get after you, force you into turnovers. That was their formula. The Ravens just can't score points.
right, and you just named some examples. Just look at Joe Flacco early in his career with Anquan Bolden. I mean, 2012. Look, Joe was amazing.
He was.
There was a historic postseason run. But let's not also act like Joe was just throwing perfect darts and receivers were just catching it in
Oh,
stride. I mean, he was throwing the ball up to Anquan Bolden when he was covered, and Anquan Bolden made plays. And that's not that. And to be clear, that's not diminishing Flacco, or that's just saying that His wide receiver, his
Dennis
wide
Pitta,
receiver one
the
got
one catch he made against the Broncos, what, third and whatever, and Joe
backed up
tucked
at
it
their
up
goal
there
line. Sure.
at the
Yeah,
goal line,
yeah,
and here comes
absolutely.
Pitta. Again, great catch radius. He gets up there, he gets his hands on the ball. All those were
Right.
instrumental in the Ravens winning the Super Bowl that year.
Right. And to be clear, Lamar has one guy who does that, Mark Andrews, and we see how wildly successful that has been. But you
One
need
guy.
more than one guy doing it. You need, to me, you need three, and that doesn't mean that they're
You do.
all pros,
You do.
but you need a legitimate number one wide receiver in the way that Anquan Bolden wasn't a top 5 wide receiver with the Ravens, but he was their number one wide receiver. And Dennis Pitta by the 2011 end of 2011 and certainly in 2012 was an impact pass catcher. But
And
they
you
still
talked
had
about injuries.
still had Torrey
You and I
Smith.
talked about injuries. And in the preseason, we said, what if Bateman gets hurt?
Yeah.
With the absence of Hollywood Brown. You and I, we were drafting, we're putting a roster together. We would have wanted Bateman, we would have wanted Hollywood Brown, and maybe another first or second or third draft pick, just because you just don't know in this
I mean,
league.
take a look at what we're going to see on Conference Championship Sunday. The Chiefs are a little bit of the exception because Patrick Mahomes is far and away the best quarterback in the NFL. And look, it's funny to me. I do think, after this past weekend, I even made this comment to Nestor, I believe, in our post-game reaction. I do think there's a very sound argument at this point for putting Joe Burrow over Josh Allen, but I still think that's very close, and I think that's still Coke or Pepsi kind of deal. You have either one of those guys, you're still feeling great. However, some of the conjecture and some of the talking heads this week talking about if Joe Burrow and the Bengals win on Sunday, that he passes Patrick Mahomes. Get out of here with that. Patrick Mahomes is the best.
No,
he's the best.
Look,
period.
Joe's got to win something. And
if he wins a Super Bowl and then beats him again next year, then we can talk. Then we start to talk about it. But until then, Patrick Mahomes. They've been 5 straight AFC Championship games.
Unbelievable.
That's impressive. But the point I was trying to make, and I don't want to get too far off track praising Mahomes, although he's still the best, and that's why I just wanted to shoot down that notion. But they traded away Tyreek Hill. They don't have a phenomenal group of wide receivers at this point in time. Now, their group is still better than the Ravens. Let's be clear about that.
That's not saying much.
Fairness. They have Travis Kelce, who's tight end 1. He's the best in the league, and guys like Mark Andrews and George Kittle are, at different times they get close to him, but Kelce's been, the best for several years now. But beyond Kansas City, and again, that was the exception, and that's why Patrick Mahomes is going to win another MVP this year. You look at those other 3 teams in this conference championship weekend. Look at the pass catchers they have. Look at the 49ers. Now the 49ers do it differently. They're not. Brock Purdy's not slinging it 50 times a game. They're not built to do that. However, they have George Kittle. They have Deebo Samuel. They have Brandon Ayuk, who is a guy that probably has frustrated a lot of fantasy football owners like myself over the last few years.
Hot and cold, Mr.
He's
Hot and cold.
But he's, as far as a number 2 receiver, not bad. They have McCaffrey as a target and catching passes out of the backfield. Weapons for a 7th round rookie quarterback. Look at the Eagles. We don't need to go over that. We know what weapons they have and what they've done for their quarterback that took Jalen Hurts from a guy who people were still trying to figure out if he was, how serious of a franchise quarterback he might be, to a guy who might have been the MVP before he hurt his shoulder in December. You look at the Bengals. My goodness.
But stay with the Niners for a second before we move to the Bengals. They have 3 guys. Give me 3 guys better with Yak than McCaffrey, than Samuel and Kittle. Yards after catch. Give me 3 players, a tight end, wide receiver, and running back that are better. You'd have to think long and hard to find 3 better at those positions. So they have explosive weapons at those key positions.
No question. So, but
and the Bengals, go ahead. Talk about the Bengals, whether it's Mixon or the 3-headed monster wide receiver and Hayden Hurst.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst has made some plays for them as well. So it's just not just Mixon. Pirine, who can run the football, and we've seen, saw what they were able to do. And this past Sunday was a great example of this. Is why Nestor and I have butted heads about this a little bit, because every time I talk about the passing game or talk about wide receiver, sometimes we'll use the argument, well, they're not going to be a team that throws 45 times a game. And I say over and over, that's not what I'm saying. They need to be able to do both. more
Balance,
efficiently. They need
balance.
balance. And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean you just go into a game all the time and say, well, we're going to run it 25 times and we're going to throw it
Hey,
25 times. That's not what that means either. It means a capability of to being efficient and effective in doing either one, depending on game script, depending on personnel looks, defensive packages and all those looks you're getting based on the weather. Look at that. I mean, the fact that Cincinnati could run the ball and Buffalo couldn't in the snow. I mean, that was a major factor in that game.
their
So,
offensive line being down 3 offensive linemen, you got to give them a lot of credit. But the problem with the
oh,
Ravens, Luke, as constructed, even with Lamar Jackson at quarterback, with that Greg Roman offense, falling behind was a big mountain for this team to overcome. You had
no
to play
doubt.
a perfect game, right? Your defense had to be perfect. You had to get the lead, and if you fell behind by a score or two, you're not catching up. Whereas teams like the Chiefs, the Jaguars, all these, I mean, they can score 25, 30 points on you in the blink of an eye.
No doubt. No question about it. And to be clear, that also doesn't mean that defense doesn't matter either.
Of course it
I mean,
does.
one thing that I thought was, kind of undersold by a lot of people for me was how well the Kansas City defense played after Mahomes goes out. I mean, it's not as though they had a 3-touchdown lead when he hurts his
Stepped up.
ankle and misses the rest of the second quarter. Their defense played well and really took the pressure off of Henny and what was a diminished Kansas City offense. Now, of course, Mahomes came back and played and still made plays, and that's why he's the best. But at less than 100%, there you go. I mean, Kansas City, no one thinks about their defense, but in a situation where they needed to come through, they played well. So again, you need to have a well-rounded, balanced roster. And the
100%.
Ravens, certain elements of their roster were really good this year, but the elements that weren't good, boy, they stunk. They stunk at wide receiver this year. So, you've got to fix that. And the problem is, this goes back to, because everything comes back to Lamar Jackson. How do you go about doing that easily when, if you are talking about potentially having to give him the exclusive franchise tag, and you do have a first round pick, but you don't have a second round pick? And now keep in mind, they got Roquan Smith. So don't feel sorry for them. They made the choice to do that. And then they signed Roquan Smith long term. But you need at least one wide receiver, if not two. And I think you do need two. I mean, for me, it would be a veteran and a draft pick relatively early. It doesn't
I
have to
would
be a
agree.
first rounder, but
100%.
you also need a corner because, unless Marcus Peters is giving you quite a discount, no, you need an outside
He
corner.
may, and even if he does, you still need the corner. You do
Yeah,
because he's 30 years old. He's been nicked up. So even look, I
yeah,
hope he comes back. I think you hope he comes back. He's a great Raven. He plays like a Raven, but he's been nicked up. So to me,
yeah,
even if he comes back on a team friendly deal, I would still draft a corner. I mean, at
yeah.
this point, if Lamar Jackson gets tagged and signed, whatever happens, if they work it out with Lamar, I'm still taking a corner at 22.
Right. But that's why this is so unsettling, because if you don't have Lamar signed long term, then you're not going to have cap space. I mean, you're going to have to cut veterans. I mean, you're going to be
Sure.
parting ways with at least a few guys. And you have a first round pick, but then you don't have another pick until round 3. I mean, that's, if you're talking about having to fill needs with late day 2 and early day 3 picks, that's not
Yeah.
filling needs. That's throwing darts.
You're talking about
So,
trading, but you're talking about trading back in the second round to pick up the extra pick.
yeah, I mean, it might be something like that. I mean, it's just, that's where you look at this thing, and that's why I feel you need a resolution, because this goes back to Daniel Jeremiah, who, by the way, is plugged into, we know, has a Ravens history. So the fact that I don't think he actually believes the Ravens are going to draft Anthony Richardson at 22nd overall, but the fact that he threw that dart tells me that he senses that there's a very distinct possibility that the Ravens will consider trading Lamar Jackson. Yeah. And then if they trade Lamar Jackson, they're certainly going to be in the quarterback market, wherever their multiple first round picks are going to be, whether it's very early and, you've got a chance to try to, to draft Stroud, or, I don't think you're going to get Bryce Young unless the Texans are the team that trades for Lamar Jackson. But him throwing that dart again tells me, because it makes zero sense to me to tag Lamar Jackson at the exclusive number and then draft a quarterback in the first round. You might as well just trade Lamar then, because
I don't think
you're
you're
not
doing
that pick is not helping you win when you have dramatic needs at wide receiver and at corner at this stage of the offseason. So, again, that to me tells me that there's a very distinct, real possibility, regardless of what the Ravens said last Thursday. And keep in mind, Eric DeCosta said when asked about a trade, he said, that's not something we're going to talk about at this point. That doesn't mean that they're not going to talk about it at a later point. So
they'll be talking. They'll tag him, and look, he'll either sign or they'll trade him, A or B. That's the path I see them taking. Last thing for me, Luke, is the offensive coordinator position. I know that I think John Harbaugh was spot on when he said it's one of the best jobs in the world. It is. It's one of 32. So not knowing who your quarterback's going to be, to me, maybe you don't get your first, second, or third choice, but there'll be 30 other guys that want that job. So to me, not knowing who your QB is going to be, it's not going to be prohibitive in terms of hiring a decent OC, whether he's from within or from outside of the organization.
Well, I will disagree with when you said if it's within, that tells me the search is not going well, and it's a big reason why is because there's not confidence that Lamar Jackson is going to be there.
Yeah, and I got you.
And some of these other coordinator candidates are looking at the Chargers job, or hey, let's face it, there's 10 different openings at offensive coordinator. There's, and look, let's be clear. I'm not saying the Ravens are 10th on that list without Lamar Jackson, but they're not nearly as high on the list without Lamar Jackson.
Can't be higher, of course.
Yes. So, but your general point is well taken. And this is where I think you probably behind closed doors, and this would be a second interview kind of conversation, because you're presumably having Zoom meetings with most of these guys, at least the initial meeting, and then you're bringing them into the building to really talk. If it comes to it, second interview, you're really interested, that individual's interested in you, and you're like, okay, full disclosure, we can't say with 100% certainty that Lamar Jackson's going to be our quarterback long term. However, if he's not, we're going to be getting multiple first-round picks, and you will clearly have, as the offensive coordinator, a great amount of say in who we're going to select here, as far as who's going to fit your system and what traits you like and all those different things. So
it's a great job. It's a great opportunity. It really is.
You do have that additional selling point that you can, and obviously you're not going to say that publicly,
of course not.
But behind closed doors, if let's say
it's a plan B.
And the Ravens haven't been linked to this guy, but Brian Johnson, the quarterback's coach of the Eagles, I look at where he's been and some of the quarterbacks that he's worked with, even going back to his days at Florida, some of the quarterbacks he got to play pretty well there that weren't these amazing talents. But you look at the work that he's done with Jalen Hurts, and it's not just him, of course, but that operation.
He became much better, by the way. He became much better when they got AJ Brown. He became a much better coordinator. Let's not forget about that.
Well, and that's true of anyone, right?
Because before AJ Brown, there was, look, is Jalen Hurts a real deal? Is he going to take the leap in year two? Are they going to extend his contract? He had all these questions, right? So all of a sudden, we can give Brian Johnson a lot of credit, but you know what? He got a big time horse in AJ Brown. All of a sudden, guess what? He's a genius.
Well, and
that's not diminishing his body.
Oh, no question. I got
what I'm saying to you is
it's just like
it's the Jimmys and Joes. It's the Jimmys and Joes over the X's and O's once again.
Well, it's both. It's both in concert, right? I mean, Brian Dable, who, for my money,
fair point,
deserving of Coach of the Year with what he did with the Giants. I mean, that is not a very talented Giants football team. They've got a handful.
We saw that against the Eagles, right? The disparity in talent between both of those teams just jumped off the screen.
But you just said it. Look at where Josh Allen was, and then Stephon Diggs comes in there, and look, Brian Dable did great work with Josh
100%.
Allen. There's no, and that's the reason why. By the way, that's the biggest reason why he's coaching the New York Giants right now. Is that? But they bring in Stephon Diggs. It's both. Coaching matters, players matter. I mean, it's trying to do one or the other.
But great players make coaches a lot smarter. I manage a lot of people in my life, and I'll take a talented person over a less talented person. I've been a lot better manager when I've had better people on my staff than less talented people.
No question. But at the end of the day, that's not a false choice. That you can have both. You want both.
I would agree with you. I would agree. But there was uncertainty Philly about their quarterback until Johnson stepped up, and then you got the wide receiver to really take this team to the next level. And they've drafted very, very well through the years too.
And let's also be clear, and this is the case for Lamar Jackson, this is the case for Josh Allen, this is the case for Jalen Hurts. They put in work too. And what they did themselves individually is of the utmost importance as well. It's it's a collaborative effort. It really is, and that's
And,
why
and it's easy
when
to
you
project Lamar Jackson in an offense like the Eagles, right? If you just
yeah
if you put Lamar Jackson in the Eagles uniform and Jalen Hurts in the Ravens uniform, what would happen?
yeah yeah. I mean, it'd be fun to watch as far as a hypothetical. But to finish my point on Brian Johnson, where I am concerned about the Ravens, and it's not to say they can't hire a good offensive coordinator. I mean, looks as though they're casting a wide net, as John Harbaugh said. But if you are Brian Johnson, I'm just using him as one example. Philadelphia's had all this success. You would have to think their OC may not be hired in this cycle, but there's probably a good chance, especially if they win a Super Bowl or they go to a Super Bowl, that he could be hired next year. So he's looking at this and saying, okay, maybe the Ravens want me. And look, to this point, as you and I are talking on Thursday, there hasn't been a reported link, but that doesn't mean that the Ravens aren't interested in him. But again, for this exercise, let's say they are. He looks at it and says, all right, I'd love to work with Lamar Jackson, but is he going to be there? Am I going to go there and potentially, whether it's this year or next year, he ends up getting traded, and then that's a different scenario and not as appealing of a situation necessarily. Or do I hang out in Philly for another year or two? ROC goes and becomes a head coach. I step into an OC position, a gig that I'm very familiar with. I already
Ah,
know the staff. I know the players. I know the personnel. We've got a
that's a
system
great point.
involved here. So that's just the cautionary tale side of this. And look, that's not to say that every single candidate's going to feel that way, but that's where I think you can make an argument that with Lamar's situation being unresolved, it might hurt you as far as hiring your top choice or your second choice. Now, that doesn't mean you won't hire a good person. And as I say with every hire, there's not just one right hire. There are multiple right answers to any of these hiring questions. However, it's your job to do your due diligence and to sell your organization and to ultimately hire one of the right ones and not hire a wrong one. And that's what that applies for head coaches. That applies in any
Sure.
sport. I mean, there's always more than one right answer, but there's a finite number of right answers for whatever your situation is. And that's where the Ravens are right now with Lamar's uncertainty. There might be some that you might not be able to grab at the end of the day, especially considering all the other competition. But you're right. When you're talking about an organization that's had stability, lots of continuity, right or wrong, some of that continuity, some people will say that, they've had too much of that maybe at times. And I'll hear that at least,
Sure.
but it's certainly a more stable organization that candidates that are eager to become an offensive coordinator are going to look at that compared to some other teams who might have the same kind of quarterback questions, or teams that might be coming off of a 5-11 season as opposed to 10-7. They're still in a position where they should be able to hire a very capable person who can do a good job. But again, until you have that Lamar question nailed down, there's going to be some uncertainty there.
Yeah.
Ravens fans and purple Kool-Aid drinkers can try to say there isn't as much as they want, but you just have to look at reality when we're 2+ years into Lamar Jackson potentially being able to have a contract extension, and well, still doesn't have one at this point in time.
All great points, Luke. Always interesting just hearing your point of view and your abundant insight. With that, please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media, on Baltimore Positive, WNST, your blog, and all the great stuff that you do.
Absolutely. I encourage everyone to follow us on Twitter at WNST. You can follow me personally at Baltimore Luke. Check out my blog at BaltimorePositive.com, sponsored by Coons Baltimore Ford. The latest 12 Ravens thoughts. I took a look at the Ravens rookie class, a very encouraging class. Work to do with certain individuals in that group, but certainly Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum, who were named to the PFWA All Rookie Team, which I had a chance to vote and voted for each of
Nice.
them as they were voted to that. But check out that other offseason topics and certainly monitoring the offensive coordinator search. And you want to be on the WNST Baltimore Positive Text Service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. When the Ravens do make that offensive coordinator hire, you'll get that first on the WNST Baltimore Positive Text Service, sponsored by Coons Ford of Baltimore. Any significant local sports breaking news sent directly to your mobile device. And of course, anything throughout the week on AM 1570 with Nestor. Any other upcoming Ravens press conferences, which at this point, not expecting one until we get an offensive coordinator hire or until Lamar Jackson signs a long-term contract, which not necessarily holding my breath as far as that being imminent, but you never know. But Any of that, you can check out all of that at BaltimorePositive.com.
That's me holding my breath as a Raven, waiting for Lamar Jackson to make the contract. Always fun, always informative. Luke, we'll talk some more next week, and I promise we'll talk some NFL playoffs. That something that we didn't do. That's my fault. I'll take the blame for that. As we got caught up in the Lamar Jackson conversation.
All good. Hey, Lamar Jackson's a very relevant topic and has been and will continue to be for quite some time. But looking forward to the games. We have got two great matchups. I know Vegas, from an odds standpoint, as close as it's been in a very long time with both games. So I'm looking forward to sitting back, relaxing, and watching four great teams duke it out and see which two are going to the Super Bowl in a couple weeks.
You got to stay well, my friend. We'll talk again next week.
Sounds good, Dennis. Be well.
You got it. You too. There he goes. Luke Jones here, 1570 AM WNST. We'll take a quick break and come back right after this.